welcome to the next episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. I'm Chris Wired.
And I'm Jayden.
So, this episode is going to be interesting because we're going to be paying tribute to two of the most influential songwriters in cinema. Now, the thing is, you probably grew up with a lot of their songs, especially if you're Disney fans. They were really popular during the 60s and the 70s. I'm talking about the Sherman brothers, Richard and Robert. Now, they started off their career working with Disney. Their most famous work was for Mary Poppins, which ended up earning them Oscars for Best Original Score and Best Original Song. They would do so many movies with Disney. I mean, there's a lot of their animated movies like The Sword and the Stone, The Jungle Book. Also, some other movies they did, like they did the theme song for the original Parent Trap. They also did Bedknobs and Broomsticks. But we're talking about movies that they did outside of the Disney franchise. So this ought to be interesting. Now, some of these movies you might have grown up with, aside from the Disney ones. But when it comes to the Sherman brothers, I mean, they were really good. I mean, the brother Richard got to live until just last May. He was in his mid-90s when he died.
Yeah, and even if you haven't heard of these movies, you'll certainly know the stories. All four of these movies three of these four movies are based on really classic fairy tales, in my mind. Fairy tales and also Americana history.
That is true.
So you'll at least know the stories in passing.
Yeah. And also, when it comes to the cast, too, I mean, some of them are some pretty big names for that time.
Oh, yeah. And even some that, well, not so big as of yet, but others who just, have been laid dormant for decades in some cases.
That is true. With that, let's get to work. So we're going back, for our first film, we're going back to 1968. Now, this movie was produced by Albert Broccoli, who is most famous for producing every James Bond movie up until, like, GoldenEye.
Oh, yeah. He also did Mary Poppins, too, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he didn't.
Oh, he didn't?
Yes, but he did do, like, a spiritual successor to it, which we'll be talking about. Because this movie takes place, just like Mary Poppins, it takes place in 1910s England. It has magic in it, it has adventure. It doesn't have magical nannies, but it does have a magical car.
It does have a magical car.
I am talking about the 1968 family classic Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, released by MGM. An inventor finds an old car in a junkyard, and next you know he creates it into this family car that ends up becoming magical. It can fly, it can float on water, and he and his family find themselves on crazy adventures, including going into a distant country where apparently children are forbidden.
My kind of country.
Now, I'll just say straight out, this is one of my childhood favorites. I love this movie as far back as when I watched this movie as far back as when I was only 3.
I've only seen the movie 1.5 times.
Yes, well, I watched it so many times when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, and it aired on PBS forever ago as well. When it comes to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, it's Dick Van Dyke. How can you go wrong with the lead actor Dick Van Dyke? Right off the coattails of
Mary Poppins
as well, and also the Dick Van Dyke Show, not also being also in his itinerary as well.
Yeah.
He just was on fire at that time. This is peak Dick Van Dyke.
Yep, that is true. Along with that, the movie was actually based on a book created by the guy who did the James Bond books, Ian Fleming.
Not only that, but Ian Fleming actually had suffered an injury not too long ago, was getting kind of worn out. So he was originally going to type it out, but his wife took away the typewriter, so he wrote the entire book in longhand.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is actually a very loose adaptation of the book, because in the original book it actually features like gangsters and all that stuff, and it's definitely way different.
Yeah, it is.
They wanted to make it more whimsical.
More whimsical, and not only that, but this was but Fleming originally had already been reciting parts of this story to his kids at night. So
Yeah.
this was a family story, tried and true from the beginning at the very least.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the cast.
Mm-hmm.
First, we have Dick Van Dyke as the inventor himself, Karaticus Potts.
Mm-hmm.
And the inventions he has, they were all created by this guy that was known for making a lot of Rube Goldberg machines called Roland. His name was Roland Emmett, and you can actually see some of the original inventions from the movie at a museum in England.
Yeah, some of them, yes. And even right now, the car that was in G Bang Bang, the second biggest star of the show, they made 6 hero cars, all hand-built. They were all built from the ground up. You can try and look up, what car was it based on? Was it based on an old MG or an old Ford? It had a Ford engine in it, but that's about it. That's about the only thing that was Ford in that.
I love the car.
Oh, yeah.
It's still one of my all-time favorite movie cars. Heck, if I had the chance, if I had a ride in it, that would be the best day of my life.
You would have to talk to Peter Jackson.
That is true. A few years ago, the director of the Lord of the Rings movies actually bought one of the original cars for over $800,000.
Yes, which actually turned out to be a huge undervalue, apparently a bargain, because the auction house at the time was citing that it would go for at least $1 million. That was the starting bid, was $1 million, and it settled for $800,000, and they were expecting well over $2 million.
Well,
so it actually ended up being kind of a steal for what you consider to be one of the most iconic cars of all time.
I mean, this is right up there with like some of the best cars you can think of. I mean, there's like the Ford Mustang from Bullitt, Herbie the Love Bug,
The DeLorean or Ecto-1.
Yes. Even like the TV cars like Kid from Knight Rider.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's also the girl in this movie, Sally Ann Howes as Truly Scrumptious.
Truly Scrumptious. Need I say more? Need I say more? That's a very unfortunate name.
Yeah.
Originally, she was not supposed to be the cast for Truly Scrumptious.
It was supposed to be Julie Andrews.
Yes.
They wanted to cash in on the popularity of Mary Poppins.
But that was why she rejected the role. She rejected the role because after reading the script, she felt that it had too many ties to the Mary Poppins franchise. And
especially, I mean, it's not just the songwriters, too. There's also the same choreographers.
Mm-hmm. Same costume designs. Or similar costume designers.
Yes, same time era.
Mm-hmm. Just way too similar. And she didn't want to do 2 movies that were basically the same. She wanted to do something different. So she rejected the role.
Yep. And then you have Lionel Jeffries as the grandpa, and he's just hilarious.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, every time you think he's playing cuckoo. I mean, every time he goes in that house, you're like, wait, he's going to Africa and that thing?
Why not? That's all I gotta say. Yeah. Why not?
And then you have the kids, and they're supposed to be, the cute kids who are.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're the ones that motivate their dad to buy the car.
Oh yeah.
They're the ones that understand that it's actually there's more to it than meets the eye.
Well, yeah.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang used to be a race car. They have a whole montage in the beginning showing how it went through like so many Grand Prix, right when cars were brand new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was a ragged hunk of metal at the beginning of the film.
Yeah. And then you have the side characters. 2 of them actually James Bond veterans.
Oh, yeah.
We have Goldfinger himself, Gert Forb, as Baron Bombburst. And he is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically a giant man-child who basically gets anything he wants, and the only thing he wants is the car.
Do you blame him? Do you blame him? I mean, Peter Jackson spent $800K on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have the guy who plays Q in the James Bond movies as the guy who owns the junkyard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But then you have other characters too, like you have the Baroness, played by Anna Quall, who basically despises children.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have what people consider one of the scariest villains in kids' movies, the child catcher, played by Robert Helpman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I know you're thinking, what would a villain like this be doing in a kids' movie like this? That is because the movie was co-written by the author Roald Dahl. If the name sounds familiar, he's famous for making some of the most iconic villains in children's literature. He did Matilda with Miss Trunchbull.
Ooh.
James and the Giant Peach with Spiker and Sponge.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see, who else? The Grand High Witch and the Witches.
Okay. Okay.
So he made a lot of child-despising villains, and the Child Catcher was basically right up there with his type of villain.
It was basically his specialty. He's like, how do I terrify children this decade?
Yeah.
And I guess the Child Catcher was that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, he didn't scare me at all when I was a kid, but I can understand why. But I honestly remember telling the story of it to my aunt's nephews and my aunt's grandkids, and I really scared them.
Well, okay, but how much of that is that the movie is over 50 years old? How much of that is, okay, kids can pretty much see through the special effects now, I wonder.
That is true. I mean, they are a bit aged.
They are a bit aged. Now, to be fair, like, it's not cutting edge per se, but the only company that was really doing anything cutting edge at the time was Disney.
Yeah, I mean, think about how groundbreaking it was when they did
Did Mary Poppins.
especially with that whole sequence of, you see Dick Van Dyke dancing with animated penguins.
Exactly. So the fact that a company that didn't have money and didn't have this kind of skill set was able to still pull off something like this is truly a testament. It showed that Disney wasn't the only player out there at the time.
And they brought in the same production designer of the James Bond movies at that time too.
Yeah.
He helped create the car. He helped make all the sets.
Yeah.
They built a full set. They rebuilt a full-size castle. If any of you are familiar with the castle, it's Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And funnily enough, it may look like it's 1,000 years old, but it's not even 200 years old.
No, I think it was built during the
19th century.
Yeah, it was built during the 19th century.
And it was an influence for the castles in Disneyland and Disney World.
Yeah, it was built as a tribute to the Dark Ages.
As well as for like those classic fairy tale castles.
Oh yeah, it was built as a tribute at the time when this was during the First German Empire, was basically at its peak power. It's basically how we built a city in the middle of, just in the border of Virginia, based on Roman architecture.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., all based on Roman architecture.
Yeah.
It's basically a callback.
Now, I mean, when it comes to production too, I mean, you gotta give them credit. I mean, especially the costumes, the choreography.
The music.
Yeah, the Sherman Brothers, I think this is one of their best works next to Mary Poppins.
Yes.
It has that class. It's not Disney, but it still has that Disney feel to it.
It is. It's basically, I would say, the closest modern equivalent of that is like a DreamWorks film, in my opinion.
Really?
You know, well, you think about it. DreamWorks was coming in out of left field when Disney was in the middle of the Renaissance era. This was the same story back in the 1960s. And let's talk about all the Disney movies that were coming out. You got all the classics like Cinderella, Snow White. Well, Snow White's like 30s, but still. You know, all the classic Disney princesses were in their prime at the time.
And when it comes to the 60s, it was around the time, unfortunately, Walt Disney died a year before this movie came out.
Yeah, and Walt Disneyland has a grand opening earlier that same decade.
Back in 55.
Back in 55. So Disney was basically
And he was working on Walt Disney World at the time.
Yeah, so Disney was at its peak. So for a movie like this to come out and disrupt the landscape of family film, especially with a cast especially with a cast and crew like that, it must have made the Disney execs at least for a second go, wait a second, we're not unstoppable? Just like in the 90s when DreamWorks came out of left field.
Yeah. When it comes to the songs too, I mean, they are so catchy.
They are.
And I mean, I remember listening to the soundtrack so much when I was a kid.
Mm. Yeah, and Choo Choo Bang Bang is still like one of the single most iconic musical songs of all time.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, it earned the Sherman Brothers an Oscar nomination.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only Oscar nomination this movie got. It's a shame it didn't get other nominations too. I mean, if anything, it could have gone for like maybe best art direction, costume design.
Well, we've talked about a lot of films from the 60s before. I think there's maybe even some other films we featured from 67 or 68.
Well, I know 68 was the same year as Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, that would do it.
As well as that classic teenage version of Romeo and Juliet, which earned the Oscar for costumes.
I think this one's better for costume design, personally. But I'm a sucker for early 20th century style.
Yeah, well, not only did it get an Oscar nomination for Best Song, it was nominated for the Golden Globe as well. It was also nominated for the Golden Globe for Original Score. And even if it wasn't that popular at the box office, it became huge, it still has a big following courtesy of TV and video releases.
Oh yeah.
Because, I remember having the VHS when I was a kid, and I would watch it so many times.
Oh yeah. I'm sure that there are a lot of kids who were out the tapes for that movie.
Yeah, well.
I know what you're gonna rate it.
Yeah,
I think it's my rating that's gonna come down to, really, if we're being honest.
I don't blame you because I know you're not a fan of musicals in general.
No. But first, your score.
Yeah, well, honestly, as much as I love this, I know it has its flaws. But you gotta give the producer credit. I mean, this was the same guy that did the James Bond movies.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people actually think that this is almost as close to a kid's version of James Bond as you can get, especially with the car.
Trust me, yeah, that's being factored into my score.
It's not like the Aston Martin where it has like guns built right in it.
I'd still rather have the Choo Bang Bang car than the Aston Martin.
What about the Lotus Esprit in The Spy Who Loved Me, the one that went underwater?
Honestly, if I'm gonna get an Aston Martin, it's gonna be a Montreal from the 70s, because that looks like a muscle car, but British. And when it comes to a Lotus, my favorite Lotus is the Lotus Esprit from the 90s.
Oh, what about the one that went underwater in The Spy Who Loved Me?
I don't know what car that is.
Oh.
I'm not a huge Bonds girl. I'm really not. I'm not a huge Bonds girl.
Yeah. Well, anyway, like I said, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is still one of my childhood favorites. I love it to this day. I'm still glad that Dick Van Dyke is still with us. He just turned 99 a few days ago.
What's the score then?
I'm honestly, as much as I would love to give it a 4 out of 10, with its flaws...
A 4 out of 5, you mean?
Yeah, 4 out of 5. With its flaws, I'm going to go down half of it and give it 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10, so 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah, 3.5 stars out of 5.
Because we've always done a 5-star system.
Yeah.
I'm only a half a point off you. That's shocking. I only gave it a 3 because I'm honestly, musical sequences, they rub me the wrong way, and honestly, the story within a story type movie, I'm not a huge fan of that kind of thing because it is a story within a story.
That is true.
So I'm not the kind of person that enjoys stuff like that. But it's really hard to deny Dick Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke alone's worth 2 points. Alright? Especially prime Dick Van Dyke.
Well, that's good to hear.
So between that and the iconic car and also my favorite sequence, which was when he was at the circus. That was my favorite sequence.
Oh yeah, the choreography in that is so good.
Not only that, but the invention of the automatic haircutting machine. That's the one that's still living.
Yeah, the one that left that guy with the giant...
Yeah, with the giant little swirl on top of it. No, so there are a lot of good comedic elements to it that I personally enjoy. So I
love the scene where the Baroness ends up getting ejected out of the car.
Right.
Next thing you know, you push a button, and next thing you know, she's going right up, and her dress becomes a parachute.
Not to mention one invention that did come into fruition in the movie, which is the candy whistle. You can still buy it. You can get candy whistles now.
Toot sweets.
Yes. And so there is enjoyable elements to the movie, which is why I'm giving it a 3 out of 5.
Which is honestly better than I thought you'd give it.
Well, it's Dick Van Dyke, dude. I can't. Yeah, I gotta pay respect and say, hey, you know what? Not my cup of tea, but I think that it's a must in any family home.
Yeah, I can definitely agree to that. So that was our take on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Now we're going ahead to 1973 with 2 films. The first one is actually an adaptation of a classic children's story. I am talking about... Now, this was actually an animated movie that the Sherman brothers worked on, not one of their Disney ones. And this was actually after they decided to leave Disney for some time.
Oh, yeah?
Because they stopped doing Disney songs after Bedknobs and Broomsticks. 2 years later... They actually go to Hanna-Barbera and Paramount. Hanna-Barbera, famous for doing some of the classic cartoons like Tom and Jerry, The Flintstones, Scooby-Doo. They decided to do an animated musical adaptation of one of the most popular children's books ever. E.B. White's Charlotte's Web. In a farm, a pig becomes friends with a spider named Charlotte. Next you know, he finds out that he's going to be food soon, so the spider's willing to do anything she can to save his life, even making little miracles by writing words on her web to make people think that this pig is special.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other side characters too. I mean, there's a rat that's basically hungry for anything. There's the girl who raised the pig when he was a piglet.
There is Henry as well, who is infatuated with the girl. There's also the sheep. And then there's the mother goose.
Yes, and one of her goslings becomes friends with the pig.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, I've known this movie ever since as far back as I can remember.
I know the book, I know the movie, I've seen the live-action adaptation from the 2000s.
That is right. There was in 2006, Nickelodeon did a live-action adaptation which had big names in it, like Julia Roberts, Dakota Fanning, John Cleese, Robert Redford, Kathy Bates.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, this hasn't had its shortcomings either when it comes to a cast.
It has a much smaller cast, but it does have some big names. Like, there's Debbie Reynolds as Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
There was the TV star Paul Lynde as Templeton the Rat.
Mm-hmm.
There was also some Oscar nominees too, like you had Martha Scott as the mom, Agnes Moorehead as the goose.
Mm-hmm.
You also had Henry Gibson as the pig Wilbur.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to this adaptation, it's basically almost a Disney version. It's about as Disney as you can think for a non-Disney movie.
Oh yeah.
Because it has singing, it has story, but it also has heart. It does try to stay true to the original book.
It does, despite the fact that actually E.B. White originally, when he gave the clearance to go ahead and make this film, and honestly, during the animation production of this film, it changed producers a few times, and it ended up being that E.B. White, by the end, even though at first when it comes to the original storyboards and script, he did get a say, by the end of it, he didn't get much of a say at all. In fact, he never even got to see the storyboards before the movie went into full production and animation.
And the irony is, he basically hated the movie.
He did.
Because he thought there was maybe too much music in that.
Yeah, I agree with him.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the characters. The main character, the pig Wilbur.
Mm-hmm.
We meet him when he's first a little runt who's actually going to get killed by his owner's dad.
Yeah.
But next you know, the girl who befriends him, Fern, basically cares for him. But next you know, he's too big that he ends up going to her uncle's farm.
Yeah. You know, and that's where Charlotte and that's where he finds out from the cruel sheep that that he was going to be basically slaughtered in the inside of 6 months for bacon and ham. Bacon and ham.
Well, but next you know, Charlotte is willing to do anything to save him.
Yeah.
She promises, and she's willing to keep it.
Oh yeah. And
then you have Charlotte herself, Charlotte A. Cavatiga, voiced by the late great Debbie Reynolds. And man,
it's definitely for kids who are arachnophobic or kids that are scared of spiders, which is a very common fear. Trust me when this is a movie I grew up with as well, and this is one spider that was very cartoonized. You know, so they definitely gave this spider a lot more grace, just to make it a little bit more kids friendly.
This is definitely one of these spiders that kids will never be scared of.
Never, no.
And I mean, she's nice, she's comforting, she's almost like a mother figure to Wilbur.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Plus, how far she's willing to go, even when she's on the verge of having her own kids.
Oh yes.
And then you have Paul Lynde as Templeton the Rat. He's basically the scavenger who grabs any type of scrap food he can find.
What can I say? He's a rat. You know, like,
yeah.
When people say, "Oh, that guy, that scumbag over there, he's a rat," that's what Templeton is. Literally, I think they painted the picturesque version of a scumbaggy type person very well in this character.
Yet he's still willing to help any chance he can.
No, he wasn't.
Well, that is true. He had to be forced to do it, but
forced and or bribed, sometimes both at the same time.
That is true. I mean, even the goose, when they were going to the county fair, the goose basically persuaded him to go just because of all the scraps that he could find there.
And then he became a blob. True story. He became a blob.
Yeah. You have the others. You also have the girl Fern, who at first you see how much she loves Wilbur, but after he leaves, you actually see how she actually almost understands the animals when they're talking.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There's at one point in the movie where I thought, wait, can she understand the animals? How would she get the name of the rat? You know, like, instances like that. It's like, is this one of those movies where only some humans can understand animals, but only if they're one with animals? Like Dr. Doolittle-esque thing, or what's going on here?
Well, I know
there's only like one scene where that kind of breaks that wall.
Well, I know there's also that sense of childhood innocence.
That's true.
And as the movie progresses, we see her grow up.
Yes.
We start seeing she gets into a relationship with a boy she knows, Henry.
Who, in my opinion, has the best story arc in the whole movie.
I mean, when we first see him, he's basically the nerdy guy who lives with his mom. He's forced to play the violin every chance he gets, every day.
I thought it was piano, but I guess it was violin, wasn't it?
Yeah. But next time we see him, he's just like any normal guy.
Normal guy, likes to get in the dirt and have fun, and I think that was probably the best story arc in the movie, in my opinion.
It also shows the idea of Fern growing up, too. Going away from her childhood innocence as well as her animal friends. But she still loves Wilbur no matter what.
Oh, she still loves Wilbur. She still loves animals. It's still, you even see her cry towards the end of the movie on Wilbur's behalf, just before the parade scene.
Yeah. And then you have other characters, too. I mean, there's the farmer who owns Wilbur, Homer Zuckerman, and his wife.
Yep, and the farmhand, too.
Yeah. They're the ones that find the words in the web, and they're like, okay, there's something special about this pig.
Yes, because a spider knows how to spell.
They didn't know it was the spider. They didn't think it was the spider who did it. They thought it was a miracle.
They thought it was a miracle.
And next you know, the pig is in headlines all over the county.
Yes.
People are coming in from all over to see it.
All over the county. Back when America could, when you used to say all over the county, that meant something.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you have Ferd's parents and her brother. They're not really that.
You got the mischievous brother who likes to bring in frogs and other creepy crawly things into the house. Wanted to add the spider to the collection at one point.
And then you have the parents who are so grown up they doubt that Fern is actually able to understand the animals.
Not only that, but wanted to try and teach her a hard lesson by forcing her to raise Wilbur, which only ended up being that, she just grew way too attached to Wilbur at the beginning parts of the movie.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the animation, it's
good.
Well, it's not like as amazing as Disney was at that time.
No, but it's good.
I mean, this was the same year as Disney's Robin Hood.
But it's acceptable. It really is acceptable. I think the whole movie itself, in terms of like production value, is acceptable, and
the backgrounds are really nice. But when it comes to but it does have a lot of repeated animation.
Yeah, but that was very common back then.
And I know that there are some of those people that think that this looks more like a Saturday morning cartoon, especially like the Hanna-Barbera movie shows of that time, like Scooby-Doo and all that stuff.
I didn't quite get that vibe personally, but I've always been a sucker for Hanna-Barbera. And that kind of animation style, I've always enjoyed that. So when you talk about repeat animations, you'd have to have a keen eye. You really do, because they definitely hit it pretty well.
Yeah, but still, it looks nice. I mean, it definitely has that definite Midwest farm feel.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
not to mention the carnival was absolutely stunning. I love the carnival scene, because it definitely gave you the feeling of being in a large carnival.
Well, a county fair.
Or a county fair. For me, it was a carnival growing up.
Yeah, well, but then there are the songs by the Sherman Brothers, and
those are good too.
Yes, but they can be a little too excessive with
They
some
can.
of them. I mean, there's I mean, the Goose has a whole song telling Templeton, go to the fair, eat anything you want.
Yep.
And I guess there are some songs that are kind of unnecessary to the story.
Yeah, but I think that's how I feel. That's generally how I feel with most musicals from this time frame. You know, in my opinion, this is probably we talk about this, but Charlotte's Web, and we're talking about 4 musicals, but this is not our only musical episode. We've done other musical episodes from films from the 60s and 70s. You know,
Yes.
you wanted to argue that this is peak musical era, so you are going to get a lot of extensive songs
Yes.
that don't really do much for the story.
But there are some beautiful ones too. I mean, the one with Charlotte making her web, I mean, the vocals are just amazing.
They are.
And the song Debbie Reynolds sings, I mean, she was such a good singer.
Oh, yeah.
It does suck that she had to die a day after her daughter, Carrie Fisher, died.
Yeah, that's true. Overall, like, what would you give this movie then?
That's actually a toughie. I mean, I enjoyed this movie when I was a kid, but as a grown-up, I mean, it does have its good elements. I mean, it's not bad. If anything, it's definitely a good way to get kids interested in, like, the original story.
Not especially if your kid's into 4-H.
Yeah. I'm going to be generous and give this 3.5 out of 5.
Once again, we're half a point off. I was going to give it 3 out of 5. But mainly because I actually like the story as a whole. You know, that it's a classic children's book, so I'm more giving it 3 out of 5 for the story more than I am the musical sequences. I don't like musicals, once again. So when I reviewed this film, when I went and watched the film back, I actually skipped past most of the musical sequences because I didn't think that the musical elements added that much.
I mean, there's a whole song that Weber's singing about how he can talk, and it's just, okay, this is a little too much.
Skip.
Yeah.
It was a skip. So,
Yeah.
but on the same side of it, you know, the movie's not that long. It's only about an hour and a half long. So you've got the retention for kids. It's a great
Yeah.
movie for the kids that
Yeah.
are, you know, like living out in the sticks.
And of course, if you're not a fan of musicals, there's always the alternative with the 2006 live-action version.
Or just get the book. Read the book.
That is true.
I would actually recommend that you read the book. I think reading the book is probably the best way to go about experiencing Charlotte's Web as a story.
I mean, it's one of the most iconic stories you can think of when you're a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about how popular it is even after almost 70 years.
It's still being talked about, and, you know, I'm sure that in another 10, 20 years we'll get another remake of it. For the next generation.
Yeah. So that was Charlotte's Web. Now, that same year, the Sherman Brothers did another movie adaptation. This one, they actually co-wrote the script.
Yeah.
And this was based on this was based on the book of one of the most famous American authors ever, Mark Twain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is actually a musical version of Mark Twain's classic story, Tom Sawyer. In 19th century Missouri, a boy who is a bit mischievous finds himself on some adventures with his friends Huckleberry Finn, and next thing you know, he ends up being the witness of a murder and against this guy, and he basically has to learn more about maturing. It's a coming-of-age story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know the story of Tom Sawyer. In fact, I was even in a musical version of it when I was a kid. Now, it didn't have the songs in this version, but I know the story.
I did too. I was required to read Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn in school.
I was only required to read Huckleberry Finn when I was in high school.
Yeah, I was required to read both.
Yeah. But if anything, this is about as pure American as you can get for a musical.
And not only that, but it's actually very true to the actual book itself. It's very true to form, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. When it comes to the kids in the movie, I mean, they did a great job.
They did an amazing job with the kids. Definitely a great job capturing Huckleberry Finn's independent,
rebellious
attitudes towards everything.
as well as Tom Sawyer's leaning between either being responsible or irresponsible.
Exactly.
And then you have the girl, what was her name again?
Horrible names, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Well, anyway.
Here is a Comic Sans name going right across the screen right now, what her name is.
Yeah.
Has to be Comic Sans.
Yeah. Now, when it comes, there's also Tom Sawyer's Guardian and Polly.
Yeah.
You can tell how much she loves Tom Sawyer, but she wishes that he could not be basically,
So rebellious.
yeah.
You know, like, you could tell she's at her wit's end with that boy.
Plus, he's also a compulsive liar.
Oh, yeah. Telling these really tall tales and everything. And even when his witness and testimony for the murder, that seemed like a tall tale at first, but was verifiable, thankfully, because of a dead cat.
Yeah.
Of all things. You know, like, oh yeah, dead cat involved, and it's 20 feet away from the grave. And they were like...
Not to mention the guy who actually did the murder throwing a knife right by him.
Yeah. That was a scary part of the movie, in my point.
Yeah.
That was the climax. Right there was the climax of the movie for me.
Yeah, the main villain, Injun Joe.
Mm-hmm.
I know the name is a bit politically incorrect, but...
There's a lot of parts of this movie that are politically incorrect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parts of this movie that are politically
Then again,
incorrect.
this was based on a story made back in the 19th century.
Not only that, but Mark Twain was also a fairly... he has opinions.
Yeah.
He has opinions. We're going to leave it at that.
Yeah. Now, the villain was very intimidating.
Oh, yeah.
A big guy who was...
Gimping along, definitely held a grudge.
Willing to frame a guy because he knows that he drinks a lot. Yeah, the guy that is framed, he's a good friend of Tom and Huck, and he's
He's a drunk.
I
He's a drunk.
love how he actually has like hidden places for his like whiskey and that.
Yeah, not just in one spot, and the entire town is basically his hiding hole for alcohol.
I mean, one moment he finds one in a trough.
Another moment, it's in the lake.
And then another, it's in a log pile.
That's just everywhere. It's like, where doesn't this guy keep alcohol?
Yeah. And then those are the main characters. Now, when it comes to Tom Sawyer, he can be pretty manipulative too. I mean, that whole famous whitewashing scene with the fence.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. I'm not talking about that one.
Well,
I'm not touching that scene with a 10-foot pole.
Well, he's just able to manipulate a bunch of kids into thinking that it's not work. It's not a chore.
Mortification, gratification. He made up a word.
Yeah, next thing you know, kids are bringing in stuff like little trinkets to pay to actually do the fence for him.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they realize they were conned and they're chasing him off to the lake, to the river.
I would too. I would too. If I was found like that, yeah, I would too.
Yeah. So like I said, the Sherman Brothers not only did the songs for this movie, they co-wrote the script too.
Oh, yeah.
And this movie was actually produced by the popular publishing company Reader's Digest.
Yeah, yeah. And, a lot of and believe it or not, some of the movie scenes and settings still exist today. For example, the riverboat, the famous riverboat that nearly runs over Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, can actually be found in La Crosse. The boat's still there. It's in La Crosse.
No kidding.
It's beach, but they still have it as a museum piece.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't mind going up to see it someday.
That's a 3-hour drive from here. At least.
Yeah. When it comes to production too, I mean, you can tell they wanted to give it that definite 19th century America feel.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the
and I
sets,
think they did
the
a
costumes.
really good job of it too. Like not just the set and costume, but my favorite little touch wasn't just the riverboat. I felt the riverboat was moving a bit quickly for the Mississippi, but the town, like little town area where the doctor's office and the barber shop was, like that, those little touches like that really made it feel like mid to late 1800s America, just any small town.
Heck, it was even filmed on location in Missouri.
Yes, just to give it that extra authentic feel. Plus the panoramic shots of the river.
Yes.
Absolutely stunning. Stunning.
I mean, this basically highlights that era that Mark Twain grew up with.
Yes.
Especially since he grew up right along the Mississippi River.
Yeah, and a lot of people who watch this will know how beautiful it is in that part of Wisconsin, because the Mississippi River does run along Wisconsin.
Yes,
So-
I remember even going across it to Dubuque when I was younger.
We all went across it to Dubuque or to the Twin Cities, so it's a very beautiful part of the country.
Yeah.
Especially during the summertime.
Yes.
It just how lackadaisical the life was.
Yeah.
For Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, just lounging about, fishing, doing whatever.
Yeah, when it comes to their friendship, you could definitely tell that they're very close friends, but they do have their problems once in a while.
Close friends is a bit of an understatement when you make a blood oath.
Yeah.
That's more than best friend. That is lifelong friends.
And then you have the girl that Tom Sawyer falls in love with.
And then gets engaged with.
But next thing you know, she basically, she's
sees right through him.
And he's completely snubbed because he had an affair before her.
Yeah.
They were kids.
The thing is, they were kids, and they didn't even understand what engagement was. They thought an engagement was, we hold hands and kiss. I'm like,
yeah,
that's not an engagement.
Well, the thing is, this is also a coming of age story, because you see how much Tom Sawyer has grown up by the end of the movie.
Well, yeah,
he's more responsible. He's not lying all the time.
He's definitely more mature, and even Huckleberry Finn gets his own little home.
Yes, but that leads into his story that Mark Twain would write later.
And in my opinion, a much more grandeur story.
Especially when it comes to the Mississippi River in general. Now, when it comes to this movie, I think I think it did okay at the box office, but I do know that but when it comes to the music also, I forgot to mention one thing. The score of the music, while the Sherman Brothers did the songs, the score was done by none other than the legendary guy, John Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely adds to that Americana feel.
It does.
Now, the songs are pretty good too. You definitely tell there are some that are very close to home, especially with, when Aunt Polly is singing about how much she wants Tom Sawyer to grow up and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How much she loves him despite all of his problems.
Yeah.
But some of them can be pretty fun too. There's that whole one with him. When it comes to the movie in general, it did receive 3 Oscar nominations.
Okay.
Best Musical Score, Best Art Direction, and Best Costume Design. It lost all 3 to the big winner that year, the 1973 Best Picture, The Sting.
Yep. I could take it or leave it.
Yeah. It was also nominated for the Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy as well.
Is it considered a comedy? I guess with the alcoholic in there, yeah, maybe, yeah.
Well, it's also a musical too, so.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, right after this, the Sherman Brothers actually wrote a script for a film version of Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
Reader's Digest produced that as well. And I haven't seen it, but I'm almost tempted to, just to see how they do that.
Right.
Especially nowadays, since it's like one of the most banned books you can think of and
Which is criminal in my mind.
yeah. So all in all, what would you give this movie? This movie of Tom Sawyer.
It's a toughie. I'm between 2 numbers right now, so I'm going to give it a where 3/4, 2 3/4 out of 5. Because on the one hand, I really like the panoramic shots. I really like the classic American town feel of the movie, and a lot of the characters were extremely well written. But I felt that the musical added way more fluff than it needed to. And not only that, but there's also a lot that left to be desired. But I also read Tom Sawyer, then Huckleberry Finn, right into one into the other. Because it's basically one and the same story, just split into 2 halves. You know what? I'll round it up to 3. I'll
Give it 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an okay adaptation. I mean, I'm sure there are better adaptations out there.
Read the book.
Yeah.
Just like Charlotte's Web, I would rather have read the book. And I did read the book, you know, but
Yeah.
it's one of those books where
If anything, you
reading
should see
it once is just...
If anything, this
fun.
could also be a movie you could watch on the 4th of July, especially since during the last part of the movie, it definitely takes place on the 4th of July.
It does, it does.
So that was our take of Tom Sawyer. Now for our final film, we're going to 1976 with another adaptation that Sherman Brothers co-wrote. But this is actually based on one of the most popular fairy tales you can think of.
Is this a Grimm fairy tale movie?
No.
Dang.
Now this is their take on the classic fairy tale of Cinderella. I'm pretty sure a lot of you know the story. I mean, who hasn't, especially with like the Disney version, and basically any other version you could think of. Even with the Rodgers and Hammerstein's musical version.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to the Sherman Brothers, their version of Cinderella was called The Slipper and the Rose. A poor girl named Cinderella, who lived with her mean stepmother and stepsisters, works day in and day out. Next you know, a fairy godmother appears, and she goes off to a beautiful ball where she ends up falling in love with a prince who wants to find a girl whom he can live the rest of his life with, even if it means with having to deal with political affairs that his dad, the king, is trying to go through. And of course, there's the famous she leaves the ball at midnight, and she leaves the glass slipper behind.
Mm-hmm.
But it does have some twists and turns compared to the original fairy tale.
Alright.
Yeah.
It does. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of this because while I really enjoyed the casting, I think the casting was fantastic, especially for the evil stepmother. I think that was my favorite character out of the whole film, mainly because that was cast by Margaret Lockwood, right?
Yes.
And Margaret Lockwood had actually been on hiatus since 1955 for film. So this was her basically first film in over almost 20 years. And, you know, back in the 50s, she was this very beautiful woman who played really nice parts that were fit for her. And now she's a little older and playing a wicked woman, and she voiced it so well and eloquently, gave me chills. I loved it.
Yeah.
I did. That was like the only aspect of the movie I actually liked.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to this version of Cinderella, it has both its pros and cons.
Yes.
But then again, I guess there's, as far as I can tell, the only definite version of Cinderella I can think of is definitely the Disney version.
Yeah, it is the most definitive version, and it came out only like what, 20 years prior?
25.
Yeah. So it's still, and this was of course at the very beginnings of VHS and Laserdisc and all that. So it wouldn't be too long before you would get a re-release of the Disney version on VHS.
Yeah. And of course, there's also the Rodgers and Hammerstein's version of Cinderella, which had already had 2 TV productions, with a third one 20 years later in the 90s.
Now there are some redeeming qualities of this movie. There are some really nice set. I think personally, I felt that a lot of the set design and the costume design was a bit audacious. You know, I thought that it was a bit over the top for what it was supposed to be. But there were a couple of nice elements, like in the swing scene.
Yes.
And I believe the musical scene of the what was the musical scene with the swing involved?
I don't remember the song, but I know what you're talking about.
It was something melody, and it was actually done by, it's French, give me a minute, Jean-Anna Fragendard.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
The scene was influenced by what is considered one of the most iconic paintings of either 17th or 18th century Rococo.
Yeah, back in the Rococo era and during the French period.
Yes. Now let's talk about the cast.
Yeah.
First, you have the girl who plays Cinderella, Gemma Groban.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, she's a little one-dimensional.
She is a bit one-dimensional, which is a bit of a shame because they had a massive casting call for the movie. Over 800 people, over 800 women actually tried out the role for Cinderella. 800. And they picked her.
Yeah.
And it's like, they could have picked anybody. Literally anybody.
Yeah.
And they picked her.
but still, she looks nice.
She looks alright.
I mean, her voice is very nice, and the songs are nice. Her singing voice is nice too.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, she's very passive.
Yeah.
She's not as strong-willed as the Disney version.
Right, and that's very clear in like one of the opening scenes with her, because literally coming back from a funeral and you have no emotion. You know, her father literally just died and she has very little emotion toward the news of that, and is more upset that her evil stepmother is putting her to work. And it's like, I would have been more upset about the father dying, you know?
Yeah.
Like, there was, like, no passion behind it. It was it felt so monotone.
Yeah, I mean, even her stepsisters had more...
Had more character. And even Prince Charming. I really enjoyed the character of Prince Charming.
Prince Edward,
Yeah.
played by Richard Chamberlain, who was in a movie we had reviewed another time.
Mm-hmm.
He was the slime ball in the Towering Inferno.
He was. But he did a very good job of it. He played it, he wore the role well.
And the thing is, compared to other stories with Prince Charming, he actually makes this prince a more three-dimensional character.
More relatable and three-dimensional, advocating to having more independence and choosing his own true love instead of an arranged marriage. I think that's a very passionate arc there.
I mean, there's his parents, and they want him to marry because they want to have political alliances.
Which was very common back then. That was very common in the Middle Ages.
Well, this actually takes place in the 18th century.
Okay, 18th century. Okay, I was
1700s.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the dad, Michael Hordern, he already had some musical experience in the past. He was in the film adaptation of the comedy musical A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really funny in this.
Yeah, he was good. Not to mention the old woman as well. I think that was the grandmother?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Played by Dame Edith Evans.
Are we being attacked and overrun? No. No, that's the Earl. I thought we buried him.
You also have the prince's cousin, who's sort of like his...
The Earl, yeah.
And then you have his friend, who basically his support the whole time. The guy he can talk to whenever he wants to.
Yeah.
And then you have the fairy godmother, who is actually kind of sassy.
Yeah.
She's the kind of woman that knows that she wants to do good, but they're like, do I really have to do this?
Exactly. Yeah. It definitely gives it a nice little twist to comparison to what the original Cinderella movie that we all know as a Disney movie is. Definitely gives it a better attitude.
Yeah, but she's also kind of manipulative too, because she knows that Cinderella is going to be with the prince.
Yeah.
But even when that doesn't happen, she finds a way to twist the minds of someone to her advantage.
Yeah.
And she even does some things. She even does some little magic too to make Cinderella look good to the stepmother.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, while Cinderella is making food, she makes a whole freaking all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yeah, basically a whole smorgasbord, a whole dinner set.
Yeah. And now, when it comes to production too, I mean, they actually shot on location in England and Austria.
Now, it's actually funny with the whole Austrian tie-in, because it was the Sultan of Oman, I think it was. Yeah, the Sultan of Oman that actually funded the whole movie.
That is true. The country Oman in the Middle East, the Sultan wanted to help finance a movie.
Yeah.
And so he chose this one.
It did the whole thing, which definitely ties in a little bit of that royalty into the movie.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the sets and costumes, my God, I just love the costumes. They just...
Really?
Well, they just screamed classic 18th century fashion.
I guess. I felt it was a little bit audacious and a little bit over the top, personally.
Well, think about how they dressed back then compared to, say, 100 years later in, like, Tom Sawyer.
I am. It's why we fought a Revolutionary War over it and broke away from England. Yeah, I trust me. That's been taken into account here.
I mean, you have those elegant dresses, you have powdered wigs all over the place.
Yeah, we fought a war over this. I'm sorry, but I don't care for that kind of set and costume design. I felt it was a bit over the top. I would say that one movie that does a much better job at showing the grittiness, because let's be fair, there is a little bit more grittiness to that time frame, because there was no bad bathing back then, is actually Johnny Depp's Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh.
Takes place in the exact same time, also had an over-the-top costume set, but was a lot more rustic in the sense. Definitely a little bit rougher around the edges, especially for peasants in lower class.
Well, I guess that does make sense, but of course, the Slipper and the Rose is a fantasy. They wanted to up the feel of elegance in that.
I guess, yeah, I guess. But
I mean, it's kind of like it's the sort of costume you see like one of those old-fashioned operas.
Old-fashioned is right. This movie is long, 2.5 hours. The intro for the movie, I timed it, is 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a 5-minute intro before you even get to an actual real scene in the movie.
Yeah.
So it is a long movie, and
yeah,
it feels long. It feels longer than it actually is.
I can agree that the time length is a bit too long in my taste.
Yeah, they could have cut it down.
But they wanted to add more stuff. Like, they wanted to add political aspects to the story.
And that's fine. I think that adds to it.
Because they want the prince to marry a woman so that way they don't get to war. They want the prince to marry a princess so that way they don't end up in a war. But next thing you know, he finds Cinderella, and it's questioning the whole foundation of their kingdom.
I think that's fantastic. I do, because that's actually what happened over in Europe back in the day.
It does add a bit of realism to that fantasy take.
Right, it does. But then there's again, I just felt that the whole thing was just over the top. And yeah, it's a fantasy. You need to have that to a degree. I just think that they took it a bit too far, especially with the set design and all that. I feel like that there could have been a little bit. You just talked about how the political aspect of it added realism. Why couldn't they add that to the set design?
I guess that does make sense. And also, when it comes to apparently there's also the choreography. It was actually done by one of the same guys that did Mary Poppins and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
And the choreography was good. I'll point that out. The choreography was pretty good.
I mean, you actually have the prince dancing throughout this whole mausoleum.
Uh-huh.
And was kind of, that was sort of like black comedy right there.
It is. It's my kind of comedy.
Yeah,
I mean, honest.
He's singing about past kings, what they did, and next you know, he's dancing on like their tombs and that.
I did the same thing as a kid. My mom was a genealogist. I spent a lot of time in graveyards.
And then you have the songs written by the Sherman brothers. They're nice.
They're good.
But in my opinion, they're not as memorable as like the past movies.
No, not my kind of genre either. Again, I've also felt that the music was a bit over the top. Even if it was done by the Sherman brothers, it's just like, could have toned down a little bit.
I mean, there's that whole song of the king and protocologically, or remember?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even pronounce that word.
I'm not going to try. You see me going like this and like, nope, not even touching that.
I might as well say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
But that's notable. That's notable. That's
exactly.
Rememberable. That's rememberable. That's the thing. So it's not like, so I feel like this movie is missing some of the elements that the other three films had, where it's a bit too far removed from the story in my mind.
And I get they want to do their own take of Cinderella.
Yeah, no, and that's fine.
I mean, it's just, but there's actually, I can actually say like some similarities between this and the Rodgers and Hammerstein's version. I mean, when it comes to like the whole song the fairy godmother sings right when she's getting Cinderella ready for the ball. Mm-hmm. Instead of impossible, it's suddenly, this is happening.
Yeah. So, overall, what
well, here's the thing too. I mean, I think the movie was a success at the box office. It even did receive 2 Oscar nominations.
Lost both.
Yeah, it was nominated.
It only won one award actually, and I think it was a British Film Award.
Yeah, yeah. The movie was not Oscar nominated for Best Musical Score and for Original Song for He, She, Dance with Me.
And it's kind of ironic that we kind of trashed the lead actress here because she actually got nominated for Best Actress in the British Film Award.
Wow.
And won.
What?
I think, yeah. You have to fact check that a little bit, but
Yeah,
I remember seeing a tidbit about that, and I'm
Yeah.
like, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, the British are pretty bland, but come on, this is a bit much.
Yeah, well, and this wouldn't be the last work the Sherman Brothers did.
No.
A year later, they would be nominated for Best Song for a movie they did with Lassie the dog.
Yeah.
But then they would do, but then they stopped for some time. But then by the 2000s, they were going back. They went back to Disney, and they were doing songs for the Winnie the Pooh movie, the Tigger movie.
Yeah.
And I admit the song they did with Kenny Loggins is still one of my all-time favorites.
That's a good movie. I do like the Chicken movie.
And even in the 2000s, they actually did a stage musical version of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Mm-hmm.
They wrote new songs, and it was a big hit. It's even on stage even now in England.
Yeah.
And it's still popular over there.
Oh yeah.
And it was even on Broadway for a little bit.
Well, like Mary Poppins, they're both quintessentially British films.
And also when it comes to the car that was used in the Broadway musical version, it was actually in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most expensive stage prop ever.
Really?
I think it cost over $1 million to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and they had to make sure that they had to make sure that it looked like it floats and flies.
Oh yeah. You know, and to be fair, this was like the peak musical era for America. It really
Yeah.
was, because remember, I alluded to this earlier when we were talking about one of the other films, and about how these movies were successful because this is what America wanted in the 60s and 70s, was a lot of musicals. You had a lot of big production musical films.
And some escapism. I mean, this was during the time of the Vietnam War.
Exactly. So, I mean, one of our very first episodes in season 1, we were talking about The Music Man,
Yeah.
which was a film done around this exact same time.
Yes.
So this, in my mind, is I'm dubbing the golden age of musicals, or of musicals in color. for
Second
America.
golden age,
Yeah,
because
that's
the
why I
golden
said-
age would be between the 30s and the 50s.
That's why I said the golden age of musicals in color,
Yes.
because the movies that you just referred to are black and white. Plus, you got to refer to the pre-coded musicals.
Yeah. Then you have those musicals like The Wizard of Oz and
Yeah. So this from the '60s all the way up into the mid '70s was probably peak musical. Right up until I think one of the last great ones was probably 1776. Then of course we get Star Wars breaking out in '77, and then everything's just sci-fi.
and major blockbusters.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the Sherman Brothers, I forgot to do a ranking for this movie.
You sure did.
I'm honestly going to give this a lower score. I'm giving it 3 out of 5.
I'm giving it half that. I'm giving it 1.5 out of 5. I didn't like a single aspect of this movie except for the evil stepmother.
Yeah. I don't blame you, but I mean, this is an okay version of Cinderella in my book, but it could have been better.
Yeah, I mean,
If anything, I prefer the Rodgers and Hammerstein's version of Cinderella,
and,
especially since the songs in that are so catchy.
and if it were me saying, okay, if you want to watch Cinderella, watch the Disney version. It's the most accessible version. It's the most accessible out of all the versions, and it's also the one that's most synonymous with the story.
Yeah, well, if you want a more interesting take of it, then you should watch the Drew Barrymore version of it, Ever After.
Yeah, that's true as well.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to Sherman Brothers, I mean, unfortunately, Robert died in 2012, but that didn't stop Richard from doing songs.
Mm-hmm.
Even into the 2010s, he was still doing songs for Disney.
Yeah.
Even in their live-action remakes. He actually wrote new lyrics for the live-action version of The Jungle Book from 2016.
Yeah.
And he also did additional songs he was also a music consultant for the sequel Mary Poppins Returns with Emily Blunt.
Yeah.
And he even wrote new songs for the 2018 version of Winnie the Pooh movie, Christopher Robin.
Yeah.
And you even got to see a cameo of him during the end credits, singing one of the songs. Unfortunately, he passed away back in May of this year, and I really, if you're listening up there, Sherman Brothers, your songs will be a part of my childhood as well as my whole life. And
let me just say this: he's been wanting to do this episode for like months. Okay, you wanted to do this episode for at least 4 or 5 months.
Well, as far as I can tell, these guys are two of the most iconic songwriters I can think of, next to, say, well, I really can't think of them at the moment. Well, next to Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Yeah, so so the appreciation and love for the Sherman Brothers runs real deep with this episode. Not with me particularly, but with Chris here.
And think about, and their legacy still goes on even to this day in Disney.
It does.
I mean, there's the It's a Small World,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the Tiki Room.
Now, I wouldn't say that A Small World is something to be proud of. I do know a majority of people who've been on it want that thing burnt to the ground. Okay, there's a saying that if you go on A Small World, you have to sing along, or else the little animatronics will come and eat you alive at night. Right? And the animatronics are creepy. I can't get behind. I actually rode that ride. Okay, so my hate for that is actually real here.
Thank you again, Sherman Brothers.
Yeah, thanks for the nightmare fuel.
We here are gonna miss you guys, and even 100 years from now, I'm pretty sure people are still gonna be singing your songs.
Oh, 100%. That I can agree with.
So that was our take on the Sherman Brothers. For our next episode, we're gonna be enjoying some. It'll be Christmas time again.
It will be Christmas time again. I'm actually looking forward to this one this year. I swear.
Because we're gonna be looking at 4. Last year we did 4 classic movies like Miracle on 34th Street. Now we're gonna be looking at 4 others that some of you might not have ever heard of.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to these ones.
Yeah. So until then, I'm Chris Wyatt.
And I'm Jayden.
Thanks for watching this episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. Have a happy holiday.